let's rewind. As I said, this is a particular topic where theories about what's the reality around us, and not theories, but what we are finding out about what's happening inside of us, come together and make a contact. When things become difficult, like last night, for some reason, and it will be clear probably why, for some reason, both Daniel and I had some heavy dreams, like old contents from our life, from sad moments or difficult moments, seem to come back with great force to create a sort of a low vibration. So we had to practice a little jiu-jitsu, spiritual jiu-jitsu this morning. And when Daniela said, oof, that was difficult, ay, ay, ay. And I said, ay, 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 canta y no llores, porque cantando, cielito lindo, se alegran los corazones. Now, you're going to forgive me if the song is not so good, but that means, in Spanish, ay, 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 sing and don't cry, because singing, my dear, makes our hearts lighter. And I borrowed this from our friends from Mexico, who are like the masters of turning a difficult life into a beautiful song. So thank you, Eduardo, and everybody from Mexico, because this is just an opportunity to feel better when the situation seems hard. Then you'll teach me how to sing that properly, all right? I would like to do something with you today. Since last week we talked about self-remembering and how it would be useful to be able to wake up more often and stay awake. So I've got a little surprise, just a moment. I'm going to use this application called Mindfulness Bell, but you can use any similar one. And I will ask it to ring a bell for us every now and then. Why do I do that? Well, you, of course, are welcome to download something similar. I will send you some reference to this in case you want to do something similar. But the only reason is I would like to be reminded often that we should be present. So why not a little bell somewhere? And when we hear the bell, we will try to remember ourselves. What about that? I don't know when it's going to ring. So we will hear it together. It'll be a bit of a surprise. So let's see if it works. And this will be our little spiritual guru reminding us, be awake. There is a very, very ancient book from a Chinese writer. His name was Sun Tzu. It's called The Art of War. Now, The Art of War contained a lot of statements about how to be able to defeat your enemies and to prevent the enemies from defeating you in a battle, or more generally speaking, in a war. And one of the best of these sentences that I have found said, if you know your enemy and yourself, you will never lose a battle. So this is a way to remind us that it's good to know about what's out there, which is perhaps against us for their own agenda, or perhaps because our spirit somehow has summoned it. We will mention that later. But knowing what is out there is just half of what we need in order to come out like winners in this potential war or battle. The other half is to know what's inside of us. So today we want to see the two sides, well, put together the two sides, because we've seen some of the inner part, and we will today touch upon how that makes contact with what's outside there. Let me just revise the chat for a moment. There's a message from Eduardo. Says maybe that's the reason you're wearing black today. It happens all the time in Mexico. We have to overcome very often difficult situations. So that's why they invent so many nice songs. Now, to be more explicit, this is actually green, but maybe the lighting is not strong enough. So you may see that as black.
Yes, I do.
Okay. May I ask you to silence your microphone when you're not speaking? Because, okay, that could help us for a better signal. So let's start now with some healthy conspiracy theory. And I say healthy because there are reasons why this term has been created, probably by the very control system that we are talking about today, as a way to drag down good ideas which go against the mainstream thinking in order to make them go down in our consideration once they are labeled as conspiracy theory. So on purpose, I'm calling these concepts healthy conspiracy theory because you may have to reevaluate what it means to you when you hear an idea of that type. First of all, the position of human beings in the cosmic ecosystem, so to speak, is not at the top of the food chain. So just like we eat in different ways, several other types of being, and then we breathe air and we take in impressions, there are other beings that somehow feed upon creatures like us. Not necessarily our physical body. The only creature that eats our physical body, including bones and everything, is the earth, but it is just the physical part. What I mean is more at an energetic level. For some reason, the universe has been created in a way that each being feeds upon some other being and is the food of some other being above. So there is like a ladder of reciprocal feeding. Yeah, there is also a name for that that is about 1 page long, but I will not say that for you, but it's part of a great book called Tales of Beelzebub to His Grandson by George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. So we have clues of the existence of other beings which are not like us, because since the birth of humankind, there are books and stories about spirits, about the afterworld, about gods and demigods. So there are reasons to believe that not all of that is just fantasy. There's the Sumerian tablets talking about gods walking among us and then using us as, let's say, animals in a farm or slaves. The gods that are mentioned in several so-called sacred texts are not always benevolent to us. In fact, there are many occasions where they seem to be a lot worse than the devil that they supposedly have to fight against. somebody took the pain to count all the people who die in the Bible because they've been killed by the devil, and all those who die because they've been killed by the so-called God, and God wins by like 19 millions to 12 or something like that. So it is interesting to understand why we would consider them the top being and the benevolent one after all the horrible crimes which have been described that have been committed by these creatures. In the Mayan or let's say ancient Latin American traditions about religion, there are also gods which demanded bloody sacrifices. That is also something that points in a direction where we can't just passively accept that they were there for our benefit and for our happiness. The fact that we label as a god whoever comes with a higher power than what we have, and maybe a nice shiny spaceship, doesn't mean that he is really a god in the sense that we would like to consider. We could have some naive populace consider us gods if we went with all of our technology and holograms, and yet, of course, we are not. At least not in the condition in which we are now. So I'm still going through several concepts which are sometimes considered fiction or conspiracy theory, but which point in a very definite direction. One more very heavy one is ancient Gnostics warned us in the past about the dangerous presence of entities called the archons, who are in turn at the service of a higher entity called the demiurge, a sort of a demigod gone crazy at some point with delusions of grandeur, who promoted himself to absolute God and has been living, feeding of our energy ever since. A great introduction to this sort of portfolio of strange and mysterious creatures that are in other dimensions but interact with us can be found in several sites on the internet. And a very good one that I would certainly advise you to have a look at is the introductory video on the YouTube channel created by Tom Minderle, the famous Montauk.net site. That is a great introduction to all this zoo of beings which are somehow above us, but not in a spiritual sense. So let's say they seem to have the power and the technology to influence us from the shadows, and yet they are very inferior when it comes to the spiritual content. They might not even have a spirit in the sense we mean that, or a soul. So why all of these are not just theories, or at least why are we allowed to think that there might be some truth in them after all? Let me quote you some facts which are easy to check. First of all, let's not go too far. The first layer above us, hierarchically speaking, heads of state. So there is a fantastic book from a Spanish Jesuit named Salvador Freixedo, and it's called The Human Farm. And he listed about 150 heads of state from countries all over the world who were basically criminals. And we should ask ourselves, the head of a certain nation or state should probably represent one of the best people in that state. Or, let's not be too optimistic, an average person. But no, more often than not, these people seem to represent something completely different. And they act in cruel and bloody ways towards their own people. They launch their own people in wars against other people, etc. So this is certainly something that should remind us that there's something wrong in the way the world is ruled. This is the visible part. Another fact, how are wars started normally? False flag events. So the Tonkin Bay started Vietnam War, Pearl Harbor started the implication of the USA in the Second World War. A fake attack by Poland onto Germany was used as a pretext to invade Poland in 1939. And then artificial propaganda used so that one people starts to develop a feeling of hatred against another. Have you ever met somebody who really thinks a war is a good idea? I haven't. In order to push man as a mankind towards a war, it takes a lot of artificial pressure. And even there, people will try to rebel against this. It's not natural for us. And yet, several wars have been fought, and normally they are pushed by a level which will never be on the battlefield. They will just send others to die and to kill. And normally that is done through false flag events, so artificially generated. Again, this seems to point in the direction of somebody or something that lurks in the darkness and has an agenda in order to create a sort of effect. One more important fact, the resources of our planet are enormous in terms of feeding its inhabitants. And yet, I think more than 1 billion people suffer from hunger and they are starving. And I've seen a very interesting interview by Rafael Correa, the former president of Ecuador, to a man called Jean Ziegler. He was in charge of the human rights section of the Organization of the United Nations. And he clearly explains how hunger on the planet is manufactured. So there is a clear structure in place so that the resources don't go to those who need them, but rather they create like an engineered artificial sort of situation where a lot of people suffer from hunger. You can imagine how, for example, a feeling of hatred can be elicited and created artificially by a single mean, let's say, head of state that inspires his people and inspires in a negative way, programs his people to think badly about some other people, and then creates a war. Say 1 year of war is sufficient to create decades of bad feelings between the two peoples. Even the next generation may be influenced, and they still have a terrible concept of that other people because of what they've been told. So even if they don't have any specific reason to hate anybody from the other people, they still feel something. And when somebody presents himself, they will feel something going on here. I was looking at the mindfulness bell. Consider this as a ding, because I don't know if it's doing its job correctly. Are we here? Are we present to ourselves at this point? Let's wait with faith. It should ring at some point. So we're going through reasons why we consider that a lot of these theories for conspiracy may have a solid base. One more important of these is the letter of St. Paul to the Ephesians. He wrote, "For our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this darkness, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." Well, make what you want of this. It certainly is a bit worrying, because it tells you that there is a lot of things to be careful about in the heavenly places. So not only here. And we know that they exercise an influence upon who is in the earthly places through the mind normally and through the feelings. So if they are rotten, we can expect a lot of problems coming on our poor earth. And just to recap this, why all of these arguments are labeled as conspiranoics, while, for example, religions with their stories and tales about hell, angels, sin, punishments, or certain sinister statements from the rich and eerie characters, like we need to reduce population. Why are these not considered conspiracy theories? Are they based on any more solid evidence than the other topics we have exposed? Well, I don't think so. So we have come to a point where we see that there's good reasons to take seriously certain worries and concepts about a control system, or at least some unfriendly forces in the heavenly places, so to speak. So let's assume now it's there. It's a reasonable assumption at this point. And we would like to understand, so if this system is in place, any clever ruler will know that it can't be seen too clearly. Oh, there it is. We got one. Come back to your center, please. How does a control system make sure it's not discovered? First of all, some layers of smoke and screen and mirrors must be created. So there must be layers in order to hide what's happening there. Gone are the times when slaves had chains made of iron. They're too visible. So the first layer of deception is invisibility. And the closest layer that is visible to us is, of course, the people we have elected or put into places of powers. Yet there are a lot of people who, just because they are extremely rich, they exert a power and a sort of steering ability onto how the earth is run, onto governments. Nobody has elected them, and yet they, by virtue of their riches, they feel authorized to say, this country should do this country should do that. I personally don't consider that to be fair, and we should not accept that, because the fact that you are rich doesn't make you a good person. In fact, you might argue the opposite. But let's not be too judgmental. Let's just say that they were not elected, so they shouldn't be given the right to dictate what countries should do. So let's go back to the concept of conspiracy theory. I understand this came about when John Fitzgerald Kennedy was killed. Whoever was exposing an idea that was against the official narrative on how this had happened started to be labeled a conspiracy theorist. Now, of course, the way the media pushed this concept was such that we all created a sort of a garbage dump in our mind labeled conspiracy theories. And whenever something is labeled conspiracy by the media, we unconsciously put this concept and connect it to the garbage dump in our mind space. So the whole idea, regardless of the fact that it may be perfectly true and well argumented, is under a very bad light in our mind, just to begin with. So this is the mechanism in place, one of the several mechanisms which the control system uses to try to dodge and avoid our attempts of detection. When we look too closely, something happens. So this is one of the lines of defense. Another way to hide in plain sight what they do is movies. So suppose I want to hide something that I'm doing. Then let's say I have enough power to get a movie script written which portrays exactly that thing in a devitalized version, something which is not really correct or exact. And I get that put into a Hollywood movie. So then when I express something about the real concept, like there is a corrupt entity here and there, it's easy for someone else to say, oh, you watch too many movies. So this is what they call hiding in plain sight. Now, there is a caveat here. It's important to remember. They cannot give you exactly all the truth. Otherwise, they're helping you too much. They must give you just enough so people make fun of you when you mention the reality. So for example, the Matrix movie, actually it's a saga made up of 3 movies so far. They make no mention whatsoever of inner work. So everything good or bad in the characters seems to be a given. Like you're either good or bad, or you are the Neo, the elected, the chosen. This is something that is sometimes called the stand down mechanism, which somehow suggests to you that everything is good the way it is, that you have no reason to search for a better yourself, that you have already a perfect condition, you are beautiful and magnificent, so please don't do anything to improve yourself. And several channeling contents, for example, are along these lines. There are several different qualities of channeling. And again, here I would like to quote Tom Minderle, because he's done a very nice description of them. But many bad quality channelings, they contain a message like, we are the astral command from this planetary system. We love you and we will protect you. You just wait for us, don't do anything, it will be fine. So reading between the lines, what they're telling us is, just remain as you are, don't do anything, and feel good in this illusion that everything is in hand, that we will take care of you. This is a perfect prison for our soul, because not only we are blocked, but we have the real feeling that we are doing something good, or at least we are in a great position. So there's no need to do anything actually. So this is something that was called the stand down mechanism. Like, stay right there, we'll take care of this. It's a prison for our soul. Yeah, Judith wrote, the Savior program works like a charm. Of course, if you believe that somebody else is gonna save you, and you just basically need to cross your arms and dream that you are doing great, then a huge chunk of people will just do that. False religions are probably the most blatant type of trap that will keep you where you are, or even make you worsen your spiritual position, because you are in a web of artificial beliefs which are like a press that slowly squeeze from you a constant trickle of suffering and frustration. There's a reason why some authors call this place the prison planet or a human farm. When you see how we are blocked by a mainstream religion, you can notice that some of us are able to see the deception and move forward. It's like a fish that is going through a square in the network, and then more networks have been prepared to try and welcome you. For example, a cult where you're told, oh yes, religion is absolutely bad. Come with us, we will show you what the real spirituality is. And then in no time, you are giving all of your life and your time and your devotion to a guru that is just your personal version of the religion that can deceive a lot more people in other ways. So, sorry, I'm looking at some chats now. Let's see. Yeah, so Anne is reminding us that the phrase conspiracy theory was weaponized by some agency that starts with C in the 60s, but it can be found in sources as early as the 19th century. Yeah, thank you, Anne. And Andrea is telling us, this is the reality that others around us want to build for us, so we cannot interfere. That's right. So mind prisons are built through ideas and propaganda. And if we accept them passively, then we are creating the bars of our own prison. Judith wrote something that I cannot repeat here, but it's pretty funny. And then Sean wrote, it's spiritual inoculation. They vaccinate against spiritual truth via movies. Yep, I couldn't agree more. Yet they are so entertaining. So why do we like them so much? Because they contain a grain of truth. And let me tell you, the fact that we are attracted by this is a good sign after all, because that means that we are after truth. And if there is just a little bit of truth, we may feel the attraction anyway. Then, of course, if we're not prepared, we chomp at the whole bait, and instead of getting just truth, we get the whole package, which contains a lot of lies. But at that point, we are caught, and it's easy to manipulate us. Another way to create deception and prevent the detection and the discovery of the control system is to create artificial enemies and oppositions between people. A simple example is football teams. So we are, well, I'm particularly not there, but let's pretend we are in a stadium and we are on one of the two sides. So of course, we feel a sense of opposition, and in the worst case, real hatred towards the other side. While basically we have nothing against those people, but we are forced by huge thought forms lingering above us to have a sense of opposition. It's us against them. This is just an example of how an ideology may lead us into wasting our time and forces to think badly about something or to daydream about something else. And when we question the ideology, then we're cast outside of whatever was the club, the party, the cult, because we are no longer aligned with the official polarization, so to speak. We've had an interesting experience about this. When we were part of a group, let's say a school, self-described as School of Self-Regeneration, there was a room where all the lectures were held. So we were sitting in that room almost every night. And since things were repeated over and over, after a while, we realized that in that particular room, it was extremely hard to think something against the official narrative. If you tried to think, this is wrong, you would feel an opposition in your mind, like you're trying to swim against the current. It happened to me more than once that I planned to say something during, say, tonight's meeting, and I entered that room with a very clear idea. That is wrong, and I will say that. And after sitting there for half an hour, I started to have doubts about my own ideas. And after an hour, I saw myself thinking, well, after all, it's not so wrong. I had been swayed and moved and repolarized according to the official thinking of that place because of a lingering, very powerful thought form that was created by constant repetition and constant thinking by all of the people sitting there. So it became a sort of a polarizing field, like a strong magnetic field in which all of us little compasses, we had to align because the force was too great. So this is an influence we suffer from the so-called thought forms or egregora. Thanks, Sandra. I see she's suggesting repetition is the key for brainwashing. And I can't say that enough. I will try not to repeat myself too much. That was just a joke. There is even a name for this sort of energy, this something that goes in a spectrum between slight uncomfort from agony that the human being emits when it's under a certain type of pressure, under fear, under constriction, under limitations and scarcity. Robert Monroe called that louche. It's a word which you may not find on the vocabulary, but he was taught about that in one of his astral experiences. The fact is, clairvoyants can see that. So I'm personally not a clairvoyant, but it's not difficult for me to believe that this is visible in great amounts, going up from places like stadiums or churches or big concerts of a certain type of music. And there's, of course, entities above that are eagerly awaiting that type of energy. So to recap all the situation, it would seem like the control system works to create a sense of discomfort and suffering in human beings through several branches of control. One of them is religion, another one is governments, another one is wars and clashes in order to farm this energy that then for them is so pleasant. In the Old Testament, there's even recipes to prepare a certain number of animals, kill them in certain ways, burn them in certain ways, in order to appease and quiet their so-called God. So it's a whole new branch of cuisine for making the happiness of these strange beings. The problem is it's disguised as a truth and a religion and our purpose in life, while in fact is basically the opposite. The artificial creation of fear, for example, by bombarding the public with distorted information or underlining the gory aspects of a crisis, always showing you the most horrible things, feeds our sense of insecurity. There's no connection with the current situation, of course, it's just a coincidence, right? So the artificial creation of thought forms and fear, and either generalized or inside of us, is the main method of control that keeps us enslaved. So far, we're talking about conspiracy theory, reasons why that could be true, and our synthesis of this, how that works. A lot of things could be said about how cults work, how they block people, they create walls inside their minds to keep them blocked and enslaved. I will now make a little pause because I see a hand there. So if Eduardo wants to ask a question, please go ahead.
Thank you. You already said that the current situation, the coronavirus situation, is maybe a cause to feed those beings with lush. So that was my question. The current situation that is globally and the lockdown, the virus itself, all those things are for feeding, right? Is that your opinion, Alberto?
Yes. So don't get me wrong. I agree that there are a lot of people in hospitals and there are a lot of people who have died in this period. But what I'm underlining here is the constant repetition of information which is distorted. For example, a 20-year-old has died and he had coronavirus. Now, this way of informing people to induce inside your mind a thought that maybe everybody is risking their lives, while the medical statistics say no. If you are above 60 and you have serious comorbidities like previous illnesses, then you do, otherwise you don't. But if I, the media, I remind you as often as I can that the statistics are going up, that young people are dying, and then of course they may have other reasons why they died, etc. So I'm trying to make you form your own little ghost inside your mind that is making you fearful of going out of your house, for example, or making you more likely to say yes when they say, well, we have a new proposal for you. Why don't we make a central government to take care of this and impose new measures to prevent this horrible situation to go blah, blah, blah. If instead you were fed more balanced information, for example, by a curious coincidence, the numbers of people who've died overall, year over year, is not very different. It seems like people have died a little earlier, or they died by a certain complication instead of their own original illness. So this type of news are normally in the last page or not mentioned at all. You have to look for alternative media to hear about this. But they are, of course, a lot less biased and a lot more real information. So you can spot an attempt to program you where reality is distorted, taken out of context, or chopped, so they just take a little piece, so it becomes more scary. And of course, we all are subject to feeling fear, and that type of contribution to our fear makes it grow.
Thank you. Good.
Any other questions since we're talking about questions? Okay, looks like we might continue. So we have drawn an overall picture of what's out there and how they try to influence us and often succeed, unfortunately. Now, where does this come together with the main thread of our lecture series, that is, Know Yourself? Where these archons or demonic entities meet our interiority, do they land upon a place of egos constantly shifting, or they find a solid presence which spots what's coming and can act accordingly? Of course, we cannot singularly, like ourselves, go and destroy their base on the dark side of the moon, for example. But we can prevent their actions from summoning our inner demons. Yes, we can. And that is a lot more important, because our actions will not be dictated by what's outside. Our actions will be dictated by our response, if we are conscious, or our mechanical reaction, if we are not conscious, to what's outside. So on which side we are decides whether we can have a balanced response, or we can have, better said, or we must have, because we have no choice, a mechanical reaction. And mechanical reactions, of course, come out of what has been programmed onto us. That is fear, that is hatred, that is a sense of, let's say, belonging to a certain group, and so on. So the more we have let others program us, the more we lean towards the mechanical reaction. The more we have worked onto ourselves, we go towards a conscious response. You might ask, what is an example of a conscious response? Well, let's start from the simple case. I may choose to not do anything. I may see that, yes, there are worrying news. I choose not to watch television. I look for the news. I don't let them catch me. I go and look for what I'm interested to know. I don't let the TV newscast program me every night, because I know what it's trying to do. Another example is when I talk to people, I try to encourage them instead of talking badly about bad things. That's the easiest thing in the world, to talk badly about somebody or something. It's a lot easier to resist temptation to speak badly and instead find something good and something constructive. One interesting way to represent our freedom of action is normally we are presented many situations in the world as dualities. So they say you either do this or the opposite, that's it. Now, being conscious means you may find a synthesis and a higher response in which you are not forced to choose to damage A or B, but you can choose to benefit both or to not hurt either. So the freedom of choice that comes from presence will manifest itself in times of difficulty, giving you the opportunity to not go deeper into your fears, but rather to go in the other direction, to free yourself from fears. You may still respect the legislation, and if they tell you stay 2 meters away from people or you will get a fine, you may do that. But you don't do that out of fear. You do that because you choose to. And maybe in a particular moment, you don't do that because you think it's better. But it's your choice. If you had been programmed, you would just do that because you can't do anything else. And if you happen to discover that, ooh, I was very close to that person, you might actually be afraid. While if you are aware of what the real data is, for example, in case of the virus, you might remember that, not only remember yourself, but you might remember that you're not old, you're not seriously ill. So basically, what's the problem there? But in order not to upset people, I will abide by the rules. Yeah, that's fine, but not out of fear. Okay. So the bottom line is, we personally believe there is a lot of interference, but we shouldn't attribute all of our difficulties to external interference. The danger is, if we do, then we fall into a sort of stand-down condition where we say, oh, we are just victims and there's nothing we can do. They attack me all the time. What we should ask ourselves instead is, what have I done or what have I got to do to make myself less of a target? How can I stop being, let me do the quantum physics connection here, which is so cool. How can I stop being a particle and become a wave? So in other words, instead of being an easy target, be aware of unity and feel one with everything. So I'm basically transparent to any sort of attack. Well, that's a bit of a far-reaching objective for us, but let's keep it as a vision. The more we are free from our own ego, the less visible and touchable and understandable and predictable we are for any control system. If some, say, clairvoyant or tarot reader is with you and looks at your future, what they can see, without T, what they're able to see is the mechanical development of your current situation. What they cannot see is the effect of your conscious choices, which are still to happen. So it's like they see where you're going out of inertia, but they can't see where you're going because you're taking the steering wheel and driving. Because what is visible for those gifted people and also for those, let's say, opponents we have somewhere, is our mechanical part. So they know where to touch you, to push your buttons and get you angry, as long as you let this type of anger live inside of you. The moment you clean yourself out of that, they can't push your buttons anymore, or they can to a lesser degree. So if they send what some call a matrix agent to get you angry, because they think that's a good moment to get you off your mission, then you will react a lot less, or it will be easier for you to understand that they're trying to influence you, and use some spiritual jujitsu, or simply not react. Use their force against them. Wow, that's a fantastic objective. We used to joke about this, that in jujitsu you use the opponent's force against him. And I say, so what happens if he's very weak? I'm hopeless then. Anyway, this is about fighting, but not in the way that Neo and Morpheus fight in their movies. That is a metaphor if you catch it, or is a misleading idea if you don't catch it. I wonder how many people have gone to jiu-jitsu schools after watching The Matrix and missing the point altogether. So it's not bad to be able to defend yourself, don't get me wrong. But that's not the point of it. It's just a metaphor. I see a message here from Eduardo. He is asking, what if we choose to get rid of any government in the future and to self-regulate ourselves? Wouldn't it be wonderful? I would imagine that this will be possible in the same proportion as the world population has taken a step up towards their inner freedom. So what we get in terms of government, for example, is probably what we deserve as an average. So look around yourself and look at yourself too and see what is the average level. Do we really deserve something better, or we should work a little more towards that objective? There is an interesting view that suggests that a big wave from the center of the galaxy is now upon us and is somehow raising our vibration. Don't take that with the stand down perspective, that you just sit like this and wait for the wave to push me up. Ah, so beautiful. I just get a surfboard and that's it. So take advantage of that. Make good use of the enhanced ability to see, perhaps, and to detect what's happening, of course. But don't count on that to do all the work for you. So I would say the government is probably a mirror of the people that's underneath. So working to help people raise their consciousness, and especially working inside and just helping by our good example, is the part we can do. Starting a revolution will just lead into a different way, a different shape of the same control system to happen after the current one. My opinion, you may consider this differently. Just look at what is the effect of revolutions normally. There are rare cases where they give a good result, and I'm very happy about that. But often they just mean one problem comes after the old one. So there's nothing wrong with, for example, a peaceful opposition. That is certainly a great way to make things change. As long as we have peace inside, we can do this. But do we have it? So I would say, again, forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but everything starts from deep clean from the inside.
Good, thank you.
I have a remark from Sean. In wrestling, if someone is very weak, you just overpower them. So wrestling and jiu-jitsu are not exactly the same approach. I agree. All right. So good moment for more questions if you have them. No? Okay. If not, if someone still has a few minutes of time, may I suggest we center ourselves and look inside. As always, we should sit in a relaxed way. Close our eyes if that helps us. At the beginning is normally helpful. And find your observer inside. Touch it with your inner senses. Feel your presence. When you are there, start observing stuff from your body this time. Scan your body slowly. If you feel any tension, try to release it. Don't lose your observer though. Don't get lost in your body. Check your breathing as well. If it's very shallow and rushed, you may calm it. Now look at your feelings. Go to the center of your chest. Still, you must feel the observer. And finally, to the most crowded place, our mind. Observe your mind while feeling yourself. If anything is visible, just observe. No extra thinking, please. And then when you feel like, open your eyes and make contact again with the outside world, assuming it exists. And may I ask you to turn on your camera for a moment if you would like, so we have a sort of a big group selfie here. I would like to also suggest that if any of you is happy to have a conversation, a 1-to-2, so to speak, conversation, and ask something that is not appropriate for a group setting, feel free to let us know, and within the time that we have available, we'll be happy to have a chat. Apart from that, I see a hand up. I don't know if that's an old hand or is a new one, but microphone to you, Eduardo.
Thank you. It's a new one.
Okay.
Just want to share that what you said about our interest in movies. I remember when I was a child with an old movie famous movie Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Mm.
And I remember, when I saw it, that the only soldier that felt the presence of the alien, the Predator, was the American Indian, and I saw myself in that soldier, and that soldier was killed by the predator. And after that, remember that Arnold Schwarzenegger knew the presence of the predator after he covered his
Skin?
skin with lodo. I don't know how to say it in English.
Mud.
With mud, yes, with mud. And that immediately attracted me, that we had to go to Earth to know about this. So that I remember that movie was very astonishing for me, and just want to share that with you. Thank you for hearing me. Yes,
thank you. I also remember the moment where, out of this figure made of mud, two eyes suddenly open. Looks like consciousness awakening. Who knows?
and also at the middle of the movie, when the human asked for the predator to fight, I mean declares war. Remember that part when Arnold at the middle of the night, in the middle of the night, screams, "Ah!" And the predator, what's going on? And that movie, I like it. That movie says us a lot of things in related to these things.
Thank you. It's an interesting exercise to find the good part in several movies, because there is bound to be at least a little bit. Otherwise, they wouldn't be appealing to us, would they? At least. That's my theory. Okay, well, thank you for being with us. If there's something that, let's see, I had made promise to send you something. Yeah, one is a reference to Salvador Freixedo, The Human Farm. The other one is the introductory video on Tom Minderle's site, the YouTube channel. If there's anything else that comes to my mind, I'll be happy to make that into a small message and send it to you. Apart from that, have a great weekend. Have a very conscious week. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
From our team here, goodbye, everybody, and see you soon.
See you soon.